So, going with the lines, first of all, we need to have a quick talk about the thematic Slaven game. And gonna be opening up the game with d4, black goes d5, we get a knight out. This is my favorite move order. I'd much rather prefer this over bishop to f4, and I explained the move orders in a great depth against both 1d5 and what to do when they play the first move knight f6 in the main course. I don't wanna get like super technical here, trying to keep these videos as clean and as easy to understand as I can for everyone. So just gonna be skipping this part when we're going super technical and gonna be going right after the more important sort of strategical ideas, so to speak. And after knight f6, bishop to f4, c6 is the Slav move, and after we play e3, black now in this position basically has a choice between either developing the bishop to g4 or to f5. And I've noticed around club level players, e6 is also played occasionally, which is trying to recreate the triangle Slav. But the triangle Slav is not really great against the London, and we're breaking down all of these lines in the course in great depth. But for now, we're gonna be sticking with bishop to f5. And against the Slav, you'll see me playing the c4 approach. Even though I also mentioned that against the copycat lines and against this as well, if you wanna like really simplify your repertoire, bishop d3 is an alternative, with the main idea being that after bishop takes, we take with a pawn, and we get exactly the same structure that I recommend against the copycat, with the simple plan of going knight c3 e4. But against the Slav, when they play with bishop f5, the c4 line just works so much better that here it would be a pity not to go for it. And while bishop d3 can be sort of a short and quick way to skip theory and get a game, I definitely think that if you're looking for long-term improvement, this c4 line will help you also improve as a player after you get to understand a bit better these thematic upcoming endgames. So also, I know all of you are wondering, all right, you just played c4, what are we talking about? Like, all the time in the London, aren't we supposed to just play c3? And that is one of the most common questions that I get. And my answer to that would be, well, typically c4 works great when black does not have pressure on the d4 pawn. Clearly not the case with the pawn on c6. So when d4 is pretty safe, c4 always viable alternative. And as a rule of thumb in my course, you'll see c4 recommended against, let's say, lines like the Chigorin, when the knight stays in front of the c pawn. You'll see it against d Slav, and you'll also see it all the time against the Dutch. So pretty easy to actually remember, and now we can just advance with it a little bit. After the move c4, most common way for black to play would be e6, and now I am a huge fan of developing the queen quickly to b3. And even though, let's say, maybe this may not appear so counterintuitive at first, because one of the main basic opening principles says that you kind of want to develop your queen last. And here we're going on a pretty early attack. This is specifically good against these lines where they have went for the early bishop development and pawn is pretty vulnerable. And the reason why I prefer queen b3 instead of knight c3 is because this move would allow black to play bishop d6, get the bishop trade, and I think this would just give black a bit of an easier time. So I just think queen b3 is really taking and squeezing out the most juice out of this position. Now black has a choice between either queen c8, that's a move. They could do b6 as well. But the most common one by far, in my opinion, is queen to b6. We're breaking down all these lines, obviously, inside the main course. And after queen b6, we're going to be going for c5. And here you kind of get to see why it was so beneficial to play c4 in the first place. Because imagine you put yourself in the same situation, but instead of having the pawn, you'd have it on c3. And you will have no way to basically force black to go for that endgame. And needless to say, taking on b6 would be a pretty large inaccuracy, or we can even say it's a positional mistake. Because black can take back with a pawn, open up the rook, we have no extra space, and black is just very comfortable. Sure, position is still close to equal, but this is not how you want to be playing it. So we really want to be forcing black to open up your rook. And after that, I'll just go with a Fury from now on. Knight bd7 is the most common move. Black also has an alternative to play the move bishop takes on b1 in this position, which is also covered in the main course in great depth. And knight bd7 main move, we play knight c3, and white has a pretty big threat of just expanding, so black needs to be really quick with this and play the move a6 and on b4. White already has a concrete threat of playing the move b5, so they'll need to do something like, let's say, rook c8. That is the main move, because if they play bishop e7, the point that I'm trying to make is that you can just go b5 anyways. And black should avoid this, because we can just take. They're unable to take because the rook will drop. That's pretty obvious. And say if they castle, we can just drop the bishop, and we have made huge progress. Continue with b4, can castle anytime, then eventually break with b5, and white just has an amazing initiative on the queen side. So for this reason, black is supposed to sidestep and play the move rook c8. Now, important to make a luft, make a square for the bishop, just in case they're threatening knight h5. We want to be having that h2 square for the bishop. And after bishop to e7, the most important maneuver in this position is to improve the f3 knight. And in order to find the best route, you need to understand what is the most vulnerable spot in black's camp. And if you think about vulnerable spots, then it has to be something that's unprotected. But you also know that in chess, in order that something is a weakness, you need to have a way to attack it. So let's say something is weak. If you can't attack it, this just cancels. It's not a weakness. So the b7 pawn is actually the only piece that's really undefended. And it might seem pretty tricky to actually get to attack it, but if we are becoming a little bit creative, then we can come up with this maneuver and play the move knight d2. The knight is heading towards the a5 square via b3. And just imagine you manage to teleport this knight all the way to a5. Black has no actual way to protect it. And this would just win as a pawn and most likely the game because the a6 pawn is dropping as well. So this is just an insanely important maneuver. And this really changed my whole perspective about this endgame. So I foresaw this. And after this move, since I started implementing this in my own games, white is just having huge win rates in this position. Personally, in my games, and also according to the statistics, and games are pretty easy to play, pretty intuitive. We're breaking down these positions really deeply in the main course. In like the Fury chapter, we go as deep as, let's say, move 20, breaking down all the possibilities, all the ideas for black to try to hold on. And we also have a chapter dedicated to the typical endgames where we're also discussing about how to later on make progress in this structure. So that would be already enough. I would say that you need to know about one of the most common endgames arising from the London system, which is also known as the Slav endgame. And we can now go for the next variation. So the next variation will appear on the board after the moves knight f6, bishop f4, and we're gonna be discussing a bit about a super rare line, but the point that I'm trying to make is that this is a complete repertoire. We're basically having a repertoire against any potential crazy anti-London, like the one that you see now on the board, when black is going for a very early attack against the b2 pawn. So this is definitely gonna get played in a rather small portion of your games, but these anti-Londons can be really annoying if you're not aware of them. And the problem is that we typically have to rely on moves that are, let's say, not that common from like uh, standard London perspective. But once you actually go for like the appropriate follow-up, you can notice that these kind of anti-Londons are pretty artificial. And most of the times, when something is lacking a solid foundation, if we do the right thing, we should end up on top. So after queen b6, here I actually recommend the move knight b to d2. And also, this is a bit contradictory to my main algorithm from the course, but this is really like the sort of the only position when we have to step away from the algorithm that says when queen b6 is played, first rule is if rook b1 is a legal move to protect your b2 pawn, you should do that. Then second rule is if you can play knight c3 and against queen takes on b2 you have knight b5, that is the move because it's giving great compensation. So here knight c3 is a legal move, but after queen b2 we can no longer play knight b5 because the c6 pawn is in the way and it's covering that. So then we also can't play this move. So according to the algorithm then, queen c1 would be the move here. That would be like the third option. We basically never play b3 against queen b6. So queen c1 would be the move. I'm pretty sure you can play that and still most likely end up getting a transposition into the normal Slav lines. But I was just kind of a little bit annoyed by the fact that black would play the move g6 and get into like a pretty strange version of the King's Indian. So for this reason, I decided, okay, you know what? I think we actually have a great way to just gambit the pawn in this case and play the move knight b to d2 and try to punish really hard these guys that go for the anti-London. So now black has many moves. Queen b2 is one of them, which is the main one, and we're dealing with it in the main course. But now we're gonna be talking about the move d5. And after d5, we basically just get a very similar position to the main lines that we would be getting in a Slav when black goes for an early queen b6. So after the move c4, this is what I recommend. Uh, Again, you could still play queen c1, but maybe knight h5 could be like a little bit annoying. So I just prefer c4 here. And black has a choice between either grabbing on b2 or playing bishop to f5. They could also go dc, but can just take back with a knight, and that's not like a problem. So if they're going for the safer line first, let's say, now you can simply play the move queen c1, and we're gonna be getting super standard positions that are very easy to play here. e6, and now we get to push, kick the enemy queen, and expand on the queen side. Get to advance with b4, and after knight b to d7, I really like to play the move h3, just making sure that in case of knight h5, we're gonna be having a square for the bishop on h2. So after bishop e7, now we can continue in normal fashion. e3, develop the bishop to e2, and after knight e4, this is one of black's main ideas, training a pair of pieces, preparing bishop f6, so that they can eventually organize the e5 break. King go castle, and on bishop f6. I actually like the interesting move to play knight b3, introducing some knight a5 concepts, hitting the weak spot in black's camp. And now after the move rook e8, which is preparing the main Slav break with e5, I simply recommend we play the move queen b2. And now black is stuck. They can't break in the center because we have better control over the critical e5 square, thanks to our last queen b2 move, which is covering the e5 square through the d4 pawn, which is named the X-rays concept, that is also explained in the Mastering Fundamentals chapter. And after the queen b2 move, we have a pretty simple plan. We're just about to deliver the standard queenside play, and white has annoying pressure on the queenside. So with that being said, we can go back a bit and quickly have a look on the greedier approach, which is queen takes on b2. And now I recommend we go cd5, and black still has a choice taking with a knight, but then we have a pretty stunning novelty that's gonna be shown in the main course. But if they take back with a pawn, we're gonna be playing rook b1. And here again they have a choice. Queen a2 is not particularly great because of queen c1. Not only attacking the bishop and threatening mate, but also threatening rook a1, trapping the queen. So this is pretty deadly. So queen a3 would be a better defense. But now we get another pretty stunning tactical move, which is e4. And after this move, point is that, well, d4, knight c4, and the enemy queen is getting trapped. King of queen a6. You can try to pause the video and find a winning tactic. Here white can go for the nice discovery with knight e6 check. Pawn takes, and now the bishop pass has been opened, and can collect it this way, and white wins. Something similar happens in case of like queen takes a2, there's rook e1, queen has no squares to go to. And against queen c3, you can simply play the move bishop to d2, and once again, the queen has no squares. So after e4, let's say best tie for black would be knight captures instead of taking with a pawn. And now we have a very nice Zwischenzug, or intermezzo, if you want to call it that way, to play bishop takes on b8. And this move is particularly important because after rook takes, we go bishop b5, and black will be losing the right to castle. So after bishop d7, can trade the bishops, take on e4 once, throw in the check, king has to step back, and after castles, we're down 2 pawns, we're very likely to win the guy from e4. We've completed our development. Black is so much behind in development because they have developed the queen early, breaking one of the main fundamental concepts of the opening, that you shouldn't be developing the queen super fast. And imagine this could perhaps maybe be an unclear position if black had the right to castle. Remember, they don't. The king is just stuck in the center forever. And you already know how we deal with the king in the middle, because we also discussed this in the Mastering Fundamentals chapter in the main course. With the king in the middle, need to open up the position and just play for the checkmate. So that is just a nice, simple, basic strategical rule to win these positions. And if we go back a bit, yeah, I think that's enough about this anti-London, and we can move on to the following line. So now let's actually discuss a bit about pretty similar position. After d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, we see the Slav once again. And instead of developing the bishop out to f5, black could again go for this kind of like anti-London, but from the Slav move order, meaning that they can play the move queen b6. And in this case, we're gonna be going for the algorithm. Is rook b1 a legal move to protect the b2 pawn? I see that it's not. Then can we go knight c3? And in order to meet queen b2, do we have knight b5? That's also not doable because c6 pawn covers the b5 square. Is queen c1 legal move? Yes, that's a legal move. So there you go. We just used successfully the algorithm and came to the right move. So if you're asking these sort of the right questions during the game, you basically don't have to use memorization at all. Just have this nice little set of rules that you can use, and gonna be getting a great opening. And we have a bunch of these in the main course. This is basically how the whole course is structured. You just have to learn these sort of patterns, and it's going to be super easy to implement it against various lines. So see, we're implementing this not only like queen b6 Slav, as you can see, but whenever they play queen b6 in all the lines, same questions apply, same algorithm, and this just makes it incredibly easy and effective to play. So after queen c1, black has a choice. Once again, bishop f5, like the standard Slav lines. Let's say bishop g4 is an additional option, developing the bishop to the more active square. I recommend we just play the move knight b2 d2, avoiding bishop takes on f3, which would be doubling up the pawn structure. So just knight d2, preparing to take back with a knight in case they take. And after e6, c4, knight b2, d7, we're going to be using this idea to just play c5, hit the enemy queen, and after queen to d8, we're going to be playing with b4. Just keep expanding, bishop e7, creating a threat of knight h5, so just go h3. With that tempo, and also create a square for the bishop on h2 in case of knight h5. And if they decide to keep the bishop with bishop to f5, you can just go bishop e2. And after the thematic knight e4, we can simply castle. And after they castle, we go a4. Same plan as in the previous position, just go b5 on the next move, and white has pressure on the queen side. So with that being said, I think we can move forward to the next line, which is gonna be arising after d4, d5, and we're gonna be going for the Slaven game once again, and this time we're gonna be dealing with the bishop takes on b1 variation. I'll just show you a quick line on this. We've covered knight d7. Bishop takes on b1, as I was saying, is also covered in great depth in the course. I'll just give you sort of the main idea and what I think it's my approach that's giving white an edge in these lines, and it hasn't really been tried so far. And of course, credits to Lila Zero, the strongest chess engine. And we can actually talk a bit about that a little bit later once we get to that move, and I'll show you what my sort of novelty is. Not really a novelty because I think there are a couple of games with it, but I think the sort of new approach. So after knight bd7, by the way, you may be wondering, is this trade good or not for black? And in my opinion, I think it's a pretty good trade. Because in a lot of lines, what actually ends up happening in the knight d7 lines, as we've seen, the bishop looks like really active, but it's actually not doing much. So it's covering a lot of squares, but it's covering a lot of useless squares. So the active looking bishop is actually kind of pointless. And from that perspective, trading, I think it's kind of fine for black here. And after bishop takes, rook takes, knight bd7, we can use sort of similar ideas. Play rook a1, threatening to push b5 next, so that's why they sidestep. And in this position, like the well-known path is to play the standard looking h3, standard looking move, h3, with the idea to, just get a knight maneuver, get a knight to a5, and so on. But somehow black is simply able to generate better counterplay compared to the lines with the bishop on f5 and the knight on c3. Eventually it lands. So there's obviously a lot of details about what are the extra resources that black has after h3. I'll just tell you that black has a way to make white's life pretty hard, and I don't really think that we could get like a realistic advantage after h3 with best play by black. Of course, if they, play suboptimal, you could still make a very good living by playing this way. If you're like somewhere like lower rated, I think definitely this is fine still. But for like the super ambitious players, h4 just works much better. This is, as I was saying, Lila's approach. And the idea is that, well, basically, we may force some opponents to play h5 and not allow us to expand. And this is great because it wins us a crucial tempo against black's lines when they get good resources for counterplay. And it just wins us a tempo compared to h3 because we force them move the h pawn. We achieve the same goal of creating a luft, and we get an extra tempo in the knight d2, knight b3 lines, and knight a5. But we're dealing with that in the main course, so now we'll just cover, okay, what if they just ignore and play bishop e7? Now against these lines, whatever they play, we're going to be having a very simple plan. We just expand, threatening h6 on the next move, so my guess would be that most of your opponents will push the pawn. We get the bishop to d3, and after castles, now we get to actually realize another pretty important concept that it's highlighted in the typical endgames chapter of the main course. That is, the king is becoming an attacking piece in the endgame, and we no longer need to castle. That's why I play the move king e2. And after bishop to d8, well, it might be pretty tricky to find a plan now. If you're thinking about knight e2, knight b3, that's a reasonable idea. But we have something even quicker, I would say. And meanwhile, I'm trying to not get lost into the arrows, but looks like I managed to get rid of them. And the main plan that works really well here, and how you can actually spot it in game, you can notice that black has a hook. And we refer to the hook as being the h6 pawn, because it is a target that we can use and will basically speed up our attack on the king side. More details about the hook in the Mastering Fundamentals chapter, that's aimed for players below 1500 inside the main course. And we're just going to be playing rook e1. Simple plan, do g4, g5, take advantage of the hook. And even though there are no queens on the board, enemy king is going to feel pretty weak. I can tell you that for sure. So that is a nice idea to keep in mind against the bishop takes on b1. Just have this sort of more advanced approach, thanks to Lila with h4. And white is just getting, in my opinion, pretty juicy objective advantage. So, okay. With that being said, I think we can move on to the next line. And we're going to be diving a little bit deeper into the knight bd7 stuff. So, we get the first starting moves of the Slav, get to play c4, we already discussed this part, and after queen b6, force the queens off, knight d7 instead of bishop takes, and now play knight c3, get a b4 push, rook c, they need to sidestep. By the way, pretty funny line, I actually had this in one of my blitz games, someone castled long and I took on a6 with a rook, and after pawn takes, bishop takes. This was a pretty funny checkmate. I don't really expect this to be happening very often in your games, but it's a nice sort of pattern to be familiar with. Rook c8 is definitely the move. And we play h3 here. h4 is still like doable in this position as well. I just don't think we need it here, because h3 seems good enough when the bishop is still like on the board on f5 and we have the knight. So now one of the most standard lines would be bishop to e7. Play knight d2, get to maneuver, go knight b3, creating huge threat to play knight a5, and basically here I would say black has two main ways to deal with it. One of them is like the most standard one, bishop d8, and they could also play the more passive rook a8, with the idea to play rook a7, protecting that pawn. And against this, I recommend we start expanding on the king side. We basically get to push on both sides of the board. And we have a pretty simple and straightforward plan. We want to go bishop e2, king is very well placed in the center. Remember that the king in the endgame becomes an attacking piece and just super useful in the middle of the board. And then we can just keep expanding, harassing the bishop, and just put a lot of pressure onto the enemy king side, while they're basically playing down a rook, because this guy is super passive on a7. So instead of rook a8, it's a bit better to play bishop d8. And here the most precise way to do so would be bishop d6 first, hitting the rook. And then knight a5 is an okay move. I play this myself quite a bit, but it allows black to get some counterplay after bishop takes followed by e5. And I have full informational about that in the main course of why it's not that great and just a bit better is to start with g4 right away. This is kind of my new approach that I was able to find together with Lila Zero. Just going g4 first, taking a bit of space, and then we can resume to the knight a5 plan. Sorry. So after g4, bishop e4 could be a pretty tempting move, attacking our rook, but we can just sidestep. And now we have a threat of, well, basically in a lot of lines, just going g5, hitting the knight, playing knight takes 24. So that's why they do h6. And now we have a very nice move, f4. And you can try to guess why this is such a great move. You have to think about, okay, what is black's only way to create counterplay? And you need to be looking out for pawn breaks. And black's only pawn break in this position is to go e5. And as long as we keep that under control with f4, this means that they won't have any like active counterplay, and we're basically in full control of the game, dominating both sides of the board. So after bishop to h7, let's say this could be a move, just making a square for the knight. Can proceed with knight a5, hitting the weakest spot in black's camp. Remember that idea. And after bishop takes on a5, I would like to ask you to pause this video and try to think about how would you personally recapture here. Because I've actually questioned many strong players in this kind of positions and this kind of recapture. And to be honest, many of them have got the wrong answer. So I think this is like a pretty interesting sort of exercise. And assuming you pause the video, the right move is to go pawn captures on a5. A bit counterintuitive because taking with a rook was also looking pretty juicy. But the problem after rook takes is that you don't really have such an easy way to make progress or to break in any way. Maybe only on the king side, but that's not gonna be enough typically. So much better just taking with a pawn. And what is actually the hidden idea behind taking with a pawn? Well, it's still about targeting the weakest spot in black's camp. And we're gonna do that by going rook a4, rook b4. And imagine we could teleport our rook to b4 right away. There is no actual way for opponent to defend. And one pretty funny idea is that, let's say they do like a waiting move. What kind of waiting move they can do? Let's say they play rook d8. And after rook a4, they go rook a8. We go rook b4 and they defend passive. Now we have a pretty funny plan. We could do something like king d2, and assuming they are playing waiting moves, we have a very easy and funny way to win. Time to bring the other rook. And now just maneuver it to a3, b3. There will be no way to protect b7, and white just gets to win by applying simple basic concepts of finding the weakest spot and just put pressure on it. So because black is lacking space, we have such a powerful bishop on d6. We just are completely winning in this position despite the material currently being equal. So okay, with that being said, I think we can move forward to the next line. So we're gonna be looking on the Berkey structure. Let me actually give you a quick introduction onto the modern way of handling the Berkey structure. So first of all, if you're not aware what the Berkey structure is, it's something I created a name for after the legendary Hungarian Grandmaster Berkis Ferenc. So just to show you the structure on the board, you will get it after you get these doubled F pawns. So coming back to the legendary Hungarian Grandmaster Berkis Ferenc, which I actually also had the pleasure to meet him in real life, and he's also like a great player in general, but even a better person, which is something more special. So basically, thanks to his games, he is, if you're not familiar with his name, he is a 2700 Grandmaster, or at least very close nowadays. At his peak, he was around top 30, top 40 players in the world. And for a long period of time, he mainly played the London system. And his games are really inspirational. You'll see a lot of them in the modern games chapter. And he also played this structure quite a lot. And I think he really thoroughly deserves to have this structure named after him. And I think, coming back to like the chess part, this is a structure that is very easy to play, very underrated. Most of the London beginners are, for some reason, afraid to play it. But I'll just tell you that, well, first of all, there are not that many risks that we're gonna be taking. And all the time we can defend this f4 pawn if it ever gets like under attack. Can defend it with g3, as you'll see. And the main rule that you should guide yourself whenever you have this structure is that, well, if the bishops are on the board, then we are slightly better. So just to give more of like a concrete example, if let's say we put the bishop onto d3 and the bishop is gonna stay on b7, we're just better because this bishop is restricted. And if black manages to trade off bishops, then the position is balanced, but could still play it out for a win. We have a very instructive gameplay between Boris Grachev and Maxim Matlakov, broken down in the model endgames chapter of this course, just showing pure class of how to win these dead even positions that some people may call after the bishop trade in the Berkey structure. So even though you'll see positions that are equal on the computer, this doesn't mean that there are no winning chances for white. So um, this course is like really focusing on learning how to play the structure, even though it's filled with the most precise continuations possible. You'll see that a lot of times I can go for a move that is a little bit inaccurate according to the main move, even though it's not gonna be like the main move is better and the inaccurate move is equal. It's like the main move it's much better, but it's a pretty computerish move. And I typically just go for the human approach if we still have an edge, let's say, but we keep a standard position going for the main plans. I definitely value more actually understanding and knowing how to play the position than the engine giving you a larger score. Like at the end of the day, it's really us that we have to play it and not the engine. So trust me, I've been in a number of positions where the engine was giving more than +1 and I was not able to convert because I was not familiar with the main plans and the main positions. So I think it's really important to just put a lot of value on keeping the games in structures that thematic structure, keeping plans that are familiar to you. And this way you can stay always in your comfort zone and just constantly add up in these structures, just becoming more and more confident, better and better over time. Because really, the London is an opening that can be played as a lifetime repertoire. You can pick it up as a total beginner, just learn the basic rules of chess. You can still play it, rock with it at international master level at least, okay? You could do more. I like to talk only about international master level because that's where I am. I don't think it's super fair to sell something that I'm not myself. So even though I truly believe you can reach higher highs than I did personally with this London course, I would just say that you can at least get to international master with it, which I think for most people is good enough. So after pawn takes, let's talk a bit about the modern version. So after c3 b6, classical version of playing the structure would be to just go bishop to d3. But you'll basically have to accept that, okay, after black goes bishop a6, we get a bishop trade, we have no advantage, and we'll just have to grind out these positions. And while that is still a very doable and playable approach, I think it's more interesting to go for the modern Berkey structure. And thanks to Lila Zero, White was able to come up with the most effective and most useful move in the position. As funny as it may look, that is to play h4. And I don't really want to be scaring of the newer players out there because I don't really want to make you believe that Okay, this is just an ultra sophisticated course, just having all these kind of crazy lila things. Well, sure, it has them, but it is customized in such way that I think it's really easy to learn for everyone. Everything is explained in great depth. You basically get to see text explaining all the moves. And as I was saying, if you don't feel comfortable going for the Lila approach, it's not gonna be only the Lila approach. As I was saying, you can go for the classical approach. And against your low rated opponents, you're still gonna do really great. So you could do this. If you find it easier, that's totally fine. It doesn't mean that you have to play the Lila fashion in all the time. You'll see that throughout the course, constantly you'll have alternatives to my main lines. So for sure, I think you'll have something to like on your taste as a player. So now coming back to my main recommendation, which is H4, let me explain you a bit what is the idea with this. So white, of course, is aware of the fact that okay, black is intending this sneaky idea to trade off the bad bishop. And for this reason, H4 is effective because we're delaying developing the light squared bishop and we can get to take on a6 in one go. And we basically get to win a pretty significant tempo because in the classical version we have to first play bishop to d3, see, lose a tempo, and after bishop a6 we need to move the bishop twice in order to take. And in the previous case we get to move it only once. We have h4 on the board, so this is definitely way more effective. Okay, to be honest, sometimes if black is super tricky with a move order, we will be forced to play the classical Berkey structure. Okay, that is for sure. At some point, we cannot avoid getting into this position, which is fine. We're explaining this in great depth. As I was saying, we have many model games, many model end games on how to grind down these positions. That's fine. But I wanted to also introduce you to this kind of newer theme first. So after h4, what's the point? So they do h5. I mean, they do c5, sorry. We go h5, threatening to go h6 and attack on the king side. If they push the pawn, we get knight e5 in, and pretty simple plan. Rook g1, go g4, g5, and we get to use the hook, and enemy king is gonna be super weak. If they play queen d6, that's a pretty recent game played between Nihal Sarin and Petrosian Manuel, which is featured in the modern games chapter, and that's actually a game that's not older than a month before publishing, so you really get to see the most recent games, and the course will also get constantly updated. So whenever a new top level game gets played, some idea is being discovered, or simply it's super instructive, you'll get to see an update instantly in the course. Definitely keeping an eye on that, and we'll do it basically forever. So after h6, forcing g6, can play g3, protect the f4 pawn, and now if they go cd4, this has also been covered in another Nihal Sarin game, one of the most instructive London system players, young prodigies from India, and after queen e to knight e2, he won a great endgame against Nino Batiashvili, which is covered in the modern games chapter. White was obviously better there with the play against isolated pawn. If a5, then we go a3. This is just following Nihal's games against Petrosian. And after bishop a6, can play queen e2. And after black goes for the bishop trade, can take back with a queen. And after cd4, knight takes d4, knight e7. Here's an important rule when we go for this modern version of the Berkey structure. We need to no longer castle, because this could allow knight g4. There's no way to protect the pawn. And by the way, black had to move the knight because say something like this happens, just let's say rook b8, preparing b5 in some positions, can take and go queen d4. Thanks to this h6 pawn, this is where you actually get to see like all the juice coming from the modern structure. Because now let's say they move the knight, you get a checkmate. Pretty funny, I know. And in the game there was actually like a pretty funny theme. Let's just say, actually let me make it somehow on the board. There was like a pretty funny theme that in the game, after rook, let's say queen d6 happens, we don't take the knight just to make it happen as it was in the game. Playing f1 and they do rook c8. There was like a pretty funny tactical motive. Okay, in this position we could take the knight, but that was different in the main game. and 94 was like a pretty funny winning tactic. Because of 94, there was mate, and on de4, there was queen dropping. So, okay, this is a bit extra. It wasn't really like planned for the video, but it just reminded me of the tactic that happened in their game. So, I'm just trying to point out how deadly the h6 pawn can really be and why going h4 is so useful in this structure. So, in the game, 97 happened, and as I was saying, we don't need to castle, but we can just play king f1. Get the king to g2. The king is really safe. Just get long-term pressure because of this g7 square, and the enemy king is gonna be pretty vulnerable in the long run. So, with that being said, we can move on to the next line, which is gonna be about the Berkey structure once again, and we're gonna be going over the lines where they're going for bishop d6. And first of all, I know you may be wondering, but okay, why aren't we just going bishop g3? That can be too bad, right? Can it? So, for instance, if you play bishop g3, this just opens up the door for a lot of pretty annoying lines that black would have. Just showing one of them, they could do castles, knight d2 and c5. And the problem is that they can combine it with a quick queen c7, which is actually a very popular line nowadays. And after bishop d3, they can get knight b d7. And there's no way for us to actually stop the e5 break, and black just completely equalizes. So that would be pretty terrible. And we prefer knight b to d2 so that against their line, we're going to be having c5, c3, and against queen c7, we'll have bishop takes on d6 working in a great version. With knight e5, playing f4, getting a structure named the reverse stonewall, which I like to call it in the thematic pawn structures chapter in the main course. So, instead of c5, bishop takes on f4, gonna go with this. And by the way, an easy rule that I have, again, part of this algorithm that I have throughout the course, is that, okay, when do we allow the Berkey structure and when not? So, I would say as a rule of thumb, when they play bishop d6 without having the pawn to c5, we can always allow it. So that's why we just play knight d2. Let's say they go bishop takes on f4, pawn takes castles, and we play c3, once again staying very flexible. And now against b6, once again we get to use the h4 move, going for the modern Berkey structure. And after c5, we can go h5. And if black goes for this queen d6 move, hitting f4, this still does not stop us from pushing h6. And now, if they go greedy, instead of playing the like normal g6 that we've seen previously by taking on f4, we can go for the important rook h4 move, hitting the queen, and on queen d6 we can go pawn takes, weakening black's king, and after king takes we have knight e5. Can continue with queen f3, and then white just has huge attack against this pretty lonely king on g7. And if they're going for h6, in this position, we're going to be going knight e5, and black has a choice. If they're going cd, going to be taking back with a pawn. What I realized in this structure, you don't have to be afraid of having the isolated pawn when their knight is either placed on d7 or it's kind of restricted like it is now on b8. So after bishop a6, we could continue with g4. And if they just step back with the idea to play like knight e4, well, we can just go knight df3, and after knight c6, we can trade a pair of knights, go knight e5, hit the bishop, give rook c8, can go f3, and have a pretty simple plan. King f2, bishop d3, rook g1, g5 ideas, and enemy king is pretty vulnerable. So, instead of these, they could also play the move bishop to b7, after which we're going to be going knight df3, and then against knight c6, we can just trade a pair of knights, play bishop d3, rook c8, follow it up with queen e2, and white is simply slightly better. We can continue with king f1, again pretty useful square for the king. Rook comes over to e1, knight e5 ideas, and then just launch the attack. Always make sure to use the h6 hook, and white is just having a nice initiative. So with that being said, we're gonna be moving on to the next line. arising after we get to play d4, d5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, e6, e3. Same opening, knight bd2, bishop takes, pawn takes, castle c3. And after c5, we're going to be taking on c5. This is a small transformation of the structure, and the most standard move for black is to play queen c7, and after g3, the main is queen takes on c5. Knight bd7 is a bit more precise according to the computer. I don't really think it's that natural at all, and against that, bishop d3 won't be that effective, so we'll have to play bishop to g2. But more details about that in the main course. So queen c5 anyways, I think is the more natural move, where you're going to be playing bishop d3, and case of b6, king of queen e2, stopping bishop a6 for a while. And after a5, we have very powerful knight maneuver, knight b3 hitting the queen. And on queen c7, we have knight bd4. If bishop a6, there's a strong knight b5, avoiding the bishop trade. And black is having to deal with a number of pretty vulnerable squares. And king of a4, castle share next, and white has clear edge, the strong knight on b5. And just very uncomfortable position for black to play. If we go back a bit, instead of b6, they could also do knight c6, and after castles, in case of b5, we can go queen e2, hit the pawn, and after b4, black is going a little bit too aggressive because we can just go rook fc1 and have a huge threat of going cb. So, for instance, let's say they make a random move, we go cb, and black already can't recapture because they lose the knight. So, white already has a lot of pressure on the queen side after rook fc1. So, this whole attack ended up backfiring, and would be better for black to play more passive. But after rook e1, the queen usually belongs on e2 in the Berkish structure, and after rook c8, just go rook a d1. Pretty simple plan. Bring the bishop to b1 from where it's really safe, while also being extremely deadly, keeping an eye on the enemy king. Then, okay, sorry, I'm just drawing too many arrows for some reason. Yeah, just need to make another one. Oh, never mind. So, just leave it as it is. Get the knight to b3, h4. Knight usually can come to d4. Can put the other knight to e5. Just try to push pawns on the king side, and white has a push, and we're just better. Keep in mind, when the bishops are on the board, white is better in the Berkish structure because the enemy bishop is just way too passive. So, with that being said, we can move on to the next line, which is gonna be coming from the classical Berkish structure. After d4, d5, bishop f4, play e3, bishop d6, get a knight to d2. We've seen this opening already plenty of times, so not gonna be spending any time covering the details. Once again, just gonna go for the position of interest, which is after we play bishop d3, we get the classical version. So as I was saying, if you're a beginner that's struggling to pick up the AlphaZero approach, do not worry. We also have the much simpler one, which is the classical version. And after c5, we can castle. Black has two ways. As I was saying, if they play bishop b7, just rook e1 and always protect f4 with g3. Just an easy way to support things. And queen belongs to e2. Centralize the rooks. Play the knight, place the knight on the e5 square. Same plan. Bishop goes to b1. Push the h pawn. Go g4, g5, and just go for a full pawn storm against the enemy king. And white is simply better in these lines when black has the passive bishop, and if they play bishop a6, now the position will definitely be more balanced. In these lines, black has two main plans to deal with this hanging knight. One of them is to go to b8, which is what we're going to be covering, and the other one is to play to c7, with the longer route to maneuver it via d6. And this is also going to be covered in the main course mostly. So now, talking about knight b8, just placing knight e5 first, giving them some headaches about playing knight c6. So they have to play queen c7 first, but after knight f3, knight c6, we still get a pretty equal position. But as I was saying, we're going to be covering the model endgame played between Boris Grachev and Maxim Madlakov, game between two giants of the game of chess, almost 2700. I think Madlakov was 2700 at the time this was played. Grachev was 2650, and him being the slightly underdog was able to win a tremendously interactive endgame from this position, which is covered in the main course. So, uh, okay, with that being said, we can advance to the next line, which is gonna be covering the Berkish structure after we basically get to play this bishop d3. Now they go for bishop takes on f4, and after pawn takes cd4, we go knight takes. So as I was saying, this is a really complete repertoire. We're basically covering all the important details, so I will assure you that there's no critical line that was missed. Not in the main lines. I go that far to say not in the side lines as well, as you've probably seen it in the peeking side of this course. We have something that's named the Noob Theory, basically theory that I created myself after putting up tremendous work with my students and also analyzing the tendencies of lower rated players according to the Lichess database. So here is definitely not a noob line, but just making sure you kind of know what's inside the course, so to speak. So 94 queen c7, hitting the pawn. Here, e5 is pretty annoying if you play g3. That's it. e5 is annoying because our king is in the center, so better to play knight e2, but after b6 castle, bishop a6, knight f3, we get to a position that is, again, according to the rule of exchanging the bishops in the Berkish structure, the position is fine for black. But again, you could definitely play this one out. It's an equal position. Just get to play a game. Sure, it's a bit dull, but that's always gonna be the case. There's no like perfect opening, so to speak. So you're gonna have these situations, but you still can play out a long game and try to outplay your opponent. So we can move on to the next one, and now we're gonna be looking onto the knight c7 plan this time. So actually, we're gonna see the same thing, and after bishop d3, b6, I'm gonna quickly show you an idea about the knight c7 move. So here we just like to play g3, protecting the f4 square, and against knight e8, I like to destabilize their position a bit when they're going for this kind of slower approach by going c4. And even though after knight d6, rook c1, rook c8, rook fd1, the position is still relatively equal, I think it's easier to play for white because the enemy queen is kind of misplaced, I would say. Not that simple for them to find the square. So again, I think white just has a bit of an easier position, and this is exactly the type of game that we're looking for to get. And by the way, the line that we've just seen is actually one of the really very best lines that black has against the London. So that's the hardest counter. Trust me, very few of your opponents will play like that in case you're worried about this line. So I definitely think some of your opponents are also quite likely to play openings such as, let's say, after d4, knight f6. They go ahead and play out the King's Indian. And I'm going to be suggesting in the course a pretty hidden and underrated approach, I would say, which is the move knight b2 d2. So remember, we don't rush with the typical London move, which would be e3. But we play knight b2 d2 with the idea to expand with e4. So just make sure that you don't rush with the e4 push, okay? I mean, rush with the e4 push, but make sure you don't rush with the e3 one. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm sure you get the point. So after knight d2, black can play the move d6, keep expanding, and after knight d7, bishop e2, rook e8. The whole idea behind this positional repertoire that I'm recommending against the King's Indian is that we want to be meeting e5 with pawn captures, and after they take back with a pawn, we want to be playing bishop e3. So in order to do that successfully, we need to make sure that there is no knight g4 coming, harassing our bishop on e3. And if you're asking yourself, the right questions, if you understand the main idea of our repertoire, and you have this little algorithm that I created, you can easily come to the conclusion, okay, we want to do that. Knight g4 is a problem. We need to take control of that square. And that's why we play the move h3. So after h3, guess what they're going to do? They have just played rook 8. Of course, they're going to be breaking with e5. We just take back and step with a bishop away, playing bishop e3. And we basically covered all of black's legal moves here. The King's Indian is huge, just highlighting all the possible plans for black and how you should be countering them. As a general idea, we can castle, put the queen on c2 always, and try to expand on the queen side with moves like these, either knight c4 or knight b3, and this is just easier for us to play. Enemy bishop on g7 kind of restricted, so I think it's a pretty effective way to deal with the King's Indian. And in the next line, we're gonna be dealing with the knight c6 line, because we've seen one with knight b to d7. So now we're gonna be going for the same thing. Knight b d2 first, important. Do not rush with e3 because you want to get your pawn to e4. And after d6, e4, knight c6, I'm gonna be using the same thing. And remember, rook e8, they're trying to do the e5 push. We do the algorithm quickly in our head. And you know that we want to be meeting e5 with de, and after de, bishop e3. There shouldn't be any knight g4. So you see, even the position is different. The main idea remains the same, and you can just apply these concepts all over the place in the London, the way I structured this repertoire, just making it incredibly easy to use and super beginner friendly. So after e5, okay, I mean, first we play h3, that was the point, covering the g4 square, and after e5, take once, step away, and we get same kind of position, b4, expand, a4, a5, queen goes to c2, and white just has nice pressure on the queen side. So that again shows how effective the little algorithm can really be. And if we go for the next one, this is gonna be more of like an exotic line. Okay, this is gonna be again bit of Lila's touch on our little King's Indian theme here. And after d6, e4, one setup that black has is going for knight f d7. Okay, this is not like the most common one. Okay, if you're a beginner, you're not gonna be facing this super often, but the idea is that they want to be preparing e5 pretty quickly. So against this, I like to go for the computerish approach and exploit the fact that the knight is no longer there, and just go for the pawn push. And okay, if they play something like h5, just blocking us, okay, in the main course, we also cover like knight back, we cover h6, and also cover the e5 break, obviously, so everything is covered in the main course. Now, if they go h5, we're still going to be playing it positionally. Bishop e2, knight g6, preparing e5, we just play bishop e3, nice prophylactic move, and in case of, let's say, e5, we play d5, gain a tempo, hit a knight, and now after something like knight to e7, gonna be going knight g5, which is a super juicy square for the knight. This is why it was super useful to include h4, h5, because now the knight is basically unchallenged. And after knight f6, can play f3, and basically we have a choice between two main plans. Sorry, it is your choice at this point. It's basically according to your taste. You can either go like rook c1, c4, c5, or go like queen c2, long castle, and just rush with a kingside play with g4. That's also viable and pretty good. So instead of this, I think a lot of your beginner opponents will play the move bishop g4 because they just do that, you know, getting their bishop out. I recommend we play queen c2 with the idea to be able to take back on f3 with a knight, and so that we can have this pawn under protection, because if we take back with a knight, it would have remained unprotected. So need to protect, then win the bishop pair, take on e5, do the same reaction all the time, okay? Just really, they do e5, take bishop e3. That's it. c6, just a4, and after a5, bishop e2 is fine. Even more aggressive and better, bishop c4 if you can. We have the bishop pair and long-term pressure. King castle, king of b4, and white is just much better with this bishop pair. And yeah, we're also, by the way, touching a little bit on the why are the two bishops important in the mastering fundamentals chapter, and we also have a model endgame in the typical endgames chapter showcasing how deadly the bishops can really be in the long run. So, uh, okay, now I think it's time to move on to the next line, which is gonna be dedicated to basically something similar to what we have seen, but after bishop g7, d6, e4, knight e7, we've seen this already. Bishop to e2, rook e8. We make the loops and preparing to play bishop e3. But what if they take with a knight? You may be wondering. This is as good as pawn takes in some cases. Here, we could still trade and play bishop to a3. Keep the position very similar, and after b6, queen c2 is where really the queen belongs. Queen c7, just go for the queenside play. Threatening a5, so black needs to block or otherwise keep expanding. And after castles, rook to d8. I recommend we go for the simple plan. Just rook b1 and follow the main concept of these lines. Just go for the queenside play and minus pressure. Idea is to go like knight c4, ba5, put pressure on this weak pawn with like rook b5 and capture it. So it's already looking quite promising. And again, we had basically like no hard moves whatsoever. Just develop naturally, push queenside pawns, get a weakness, attack it, win it, and go home and party. Okay, so with that being said, I think we can move on to the next one. And here we're gonna be discussing a little bit about how to deal with black's c5 break. Because so far we have seen, okay, black goes for e5 most of the times, but you'll run into King's Indian players that break with c5 too. And against this, I recommend we just go for DC. But it's important that we go DC when they are forced to take back with a pawn. Because in some lines, let's say black would have like a knight on d7. And after the move bishop e2, if they're going c5, you'll notice that we will no longer take because they can take back with a piece. And in these cases, we just keep the tension and we castle. And more details for that in the main course, of course. So just making it super clear that on c5 we go dc, it's a great approach when they're forced to take with a pawn. Because now basically dc is great because their queen has no good squares. Like c7 is typically a good square, but now it's not going to be available because our bishop is covering it. And I like to start with h3, stopping any bishop development. And after knight c6, queen c2, the thematic square, we have a pretty simple plan. Bishop goes to e2, we castle, we go rook d1, knight c4, while the enemy queen is really struggling to find a square. Plus the bishop is not super easy to develop either, and I just think that white has nice pressure without any risks, basically, in these lines. So yeah, that is how I suggest you deal with this c5 break. And we can actually dive a bit deeper into it. So for instance, after g6, knight f3, bishop g7, after d6, we're gonna be going e4. And now if they're playing c5, gonna be going dc, only when they're forced to take back with a pawn, as I was saying. And we basically stopped our talk in this position last time, but now, first of all, whenever they are going a6, we always play a4. And that's just good for us to include because in a lot of lines we'll have threats to play knight c4 and a5, fix the weak square. So b6 would be like the most common square for black. I mean, most common move with idea to develop the bishop to b7, which will be the most common square. After we develop the bishop to e2, we castle. Let's say they can play queen to c8, and now we just go rook a to d1. And after the move rook d8, bishop h2 is always really useful. And on bishop a6, when they're trying to trade off the bishops, we can avoid that with knight c4. And we can just push e5 on the next move. Typically, we'll have ideas to go e5 and e6 in a lot of lines. Just well, not really stacking when the queen can take, but after we play rook f e1, bishop f1, e6 is a nice move if they're forced to take with a pawn to sacrifice it that way and go for the kingside attack. And if instead they're trying out this knight h5 plan, hitting our bishop and then playing e5, problem with this is that it's weakening the d5 square, and it allows us to use another typical idea. Because after queen e7, knight c4, we're preparing the knight maneuver to the outpost, and also we're explaining what is an outpost and how to take advantage of it in the mastering fundamentals chapters as well. Black goes knight f4, and another typical rule for the repertoire will be that we meet this with bishop f1 and just play around the knight. We just don't touch that whatsoever. Rook d8, rook d1, bring the rook, h6, and now queen c1 is really effective, threatening to win a pawn. And if we manage to force them push g5, you can just go knight e3, and now instead of one square, we've got two weak squares, and white is just much better. So, game that I think is pretty good introduction to these c5 lines. Obviously, in the main course, we're breaking down all kinds of other plans as well. Like, for instance, in this position, we're literally covering rook c8, rook e8, queen d7, queen c8 as well, and all the possible options. Of course, you don't have to remember everything. You just need to remember like the key ideas, but just trying to highlight that the repertoire is really complete, and basically whenever you'll run against something, you'll have something as a backup against everything. So with that being said, I think we are actually done with these mini repertoire that we just had about the London. So in case you liked any of these ideas and you feel like this could be the opening for you, I highly invite you to check out the main course and join it, because we're breaking these themes that you have just seen, plus many others in a super beginner friendly manner, which will allow you to build a solid foundation and get a healthy jump start to your chess career, which will also slowly allow you to progress, as I was saying, at least to the international master level by using the same repertoire, same London system, just by adding up in time and building more experience with the lines. And I'd love to see you in the main course. Thanks for your time and take care.